I'm thrilled to welcome Jack Schlossberg to this virtual assembly. As you may know, he is the son of Ambassador Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg and the grandson of President John F. Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy. And I say all that and put those names together because there's some Rhode Island history here, which is that Jack's grandparents got married at St. Mary's Church in Newport, Rhode Island. They had their wedding reception afterwards at Hammersmith Farm, just down the coast in Newport, Rhode Island. My father and Jack's grandmother, Jackie, had been friends up until the war. They were like kid friends together. Partly as a result of that, my aunt, who's still alive today, age 97, was a bridesmaid in that wedding. And she's in the picture of the whole bridal party out at Hammersmith Farm. So there's some good Rhode Island heritage there and some good connections between Whitehouses, Kennedys, and Schlossbergs. So it's a real thrill to have you with us, Jack. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for your leadership. And I'm so happy that you and I can continue the multiple generation friendship. That started way back when.
Way back when. And lasted quite a long time. I mean,
Yes.
When my father was quite old and your grandmother was quite old, they resumed their friendship, and she would come visit in Virginia and all of that. So it was one of those wonderful, like, January through December friendships.
Well, most people associate our family with Massachusetts, but you've heard it here that Rhode Island roots run deep. So
yeah, there's a big Rhode Island piece. So you are one of the best communicators of your generation. You've got a huge following, and you also represent a tradition of patriotism and confidence in American governance. And so let me start with, we got questions for you that have come in already. You're very popular before we even got started. So Marie from Johnston would like to know what we can do to educate, she says young and old, about how important our Constitution and democracy is.
Well, thank you for that question. I think that's something I think a lot about. I got my start about a year ago on Instagram talking about politics, and it didn't come from a place of thinking ahead and making a plan. It was really, I felt that the issues were way too important, and I really wanted to say something about them and make my own statement because I wasn't hearing what I wanted to online or enough of it. And I just really wanted to make my own statement, and I thought a lot about it and started doing that. And I there's so much value, I think, in people doing that, no matter who you are or what kind of following you have. And I didn't start off with a huge following. I actually built it up by doing that. And so I think now more than ever, there is the opportunity and the responsibility to contribute in your own way and with your own voice, because like it or not, or social media is a political battlefield, and I think every voice really can make a difference.
And sometimes it's a pretty uninformed political battlefield, particularly with respect to what's actually in the Constitution and how democracy's supposed to work. What are your thoughts on best ways to communicate?
Well, I went to law school and I studied super hard. And so I find all this questions about the Constitution and the law extremely interesting and compelling on their own. But you're right. I think it's hard to give a lot of context and break through at the same time on social media. And something lately that I have found to be super moving and powerful are videos and images of leaders of the past that we associate with greatness and great leadership, talking about the same very constitutional issues that we're confronting today. And I think it really underscores the fact that this is this isn't happened for the first time, and that we are just the latest generation that's been at this fight. So I think if there are ways that you can link that to history, which a lot of people think of history as boring or no one cares, I think that people actually find it really interesting to know that they're part of a longer struggle. So I find that that kind of context can actually be really helpful when a lot of times we might look to the legal context or the context of the moment, that stepping back and framing things in the longer, as JFK called it, twilight struggle, can actually be really moving and powerful.
You have favorite clips or
Yeah,
favorite quotes that
there's
you?
yeah, when all the first couple of days of the Trump administration, they really went after diversity, equity, inclusion. And they've, made a whole label of this DEI thing as a boogeyman. And I saw this clip of my grandfather's civil rights address, and his message is really simple. And it's that he isn't satisfied until every American has their full constitutional rights. And at that time, it was a revolutionary statement, and it's become one again today. And when I shared that video, people really reacted to it, and I was surprised that there was that much interest. So I think for me, the constitutionality of questions about diversity and civil rights are really powerful and really, really important because the civil rights movement, we all know, generations fought and struggled to get the full rights that were promised in the Constitution, and that it's our responsibility to make sure that those don't go away.
It's also important to reassure people that there's often been backsliding
Right.
in America after really important victories, but that doesn't change the overall
Yes.
trajectory.
Yes. I find that, I think our opponents in the other party are really good at catchphrases and taglines on the internet. And that sometimes the impulse is to come up with your own, which I think is valuable. But I also think it's really important to pick apart the specifics of what they're saying and go after why they're wrong specifically, and show your knowledge. So I think anytime somebody can do that and really point out, no, that statement is wrong because this, and this, to me, that's, for DEI, for example, Trump outlawed DEI, he made it illegal. And people, companies that you have DEI programs can't get federal funding. I point out that that's a type of discrimination even in and of itself. If a company has a different viewpoint than the administration, now they can't get federal funding. So how is that achieving the stated goal? It's not. So I think being specific is actually incredibly valuable.
One of the things that there's been a lot of concern about is that in the last election, in the last race, and particularly in the presidential campaign, there were a lot of elderly advisors putting President Biden onto legacy media and buying old-fashioned TV ads, while Trump and his team were out getting onto like podcasts about knitting or NASCAR. It didn't really matter as long as they got his name out there, and we weren't even on the field. They were able to run up the score and pull off his tiny microscopic 1.5% victory by dint of all of that. Is that a sensible lesson to learn, and how would you expand on that?
Yeah, I think I think the only conclusion to draw is that we failed to compete online. Actually, I think the Harris campaign in the last 100 days did compete online, and it was a valiant effort. And since then, I'm so optimistic because mistakes were definitely made, that's for sure. And I think my success online is more a fact that I didn't have much competition. But lately, and especially since the beginning of the administration, I think our party is actually doing a pretty good job. And this town hall that we're doing right now is evidence of the fact that elected officials understand the importance of social media, and that you guys are competing and doing a great job. I mean, Senator, your content is great. Your floor speeches are where I don't tell anybody, but I'm ripping you off all the time. I hear you with an
Have
amazing
at it.
line. I hear
So
you with
they're
an
there
amazing
for.
line. Yeah, exactly. Amazing line and amazing argument, and then you can put it into your own words and add your own flair. And I'm seeing so much better content now from Democrats, and I would say this. I think that it's hard to overstate uh, it's hard to overstate what it means to have a senator like you wanting to do this with a content creator like me, or to even to like a video or follow somebody. It just, when you're posting online and you really care about it and you're watching what you think is all this bad stuff happen and you're not sure if it's making a difference, to have someone you admire in a position of leadership back you up is huge. And I think the party that we're doing that now is really going to be something that pays off come election day.
Yeah. One of the things that I was really interested in is that the internet was kind of written off by a lot of people as the place where short, sharp snark was what you needed to deliver. You needed to tweet out something really snarky and really quick and punchy, and then that was what worked. And what we discovered, particularly around the Supreme Court stuff, was that I could do a 14-chapter tweet with 400 characters in each chapter, essentially a short essay, and people went nuts for it. We get like millions of people checked in on it. So there's a real appetite for good content. It doesn't have to be just something snarky. And I think that's one of the lessons for people who think, well, I've got something pretty useful and important to say, but it's a little complicated. And I'm not sure if I can fit it into social media because they reward just the like quick, flashy, dirty talk stuff. And in fact, I think there's a big appetite for pretty thoughtful stuff. You have to package it right so that it fits the medium. But, I'm getting like 5-6 minute average times when people watch my YouTube. That's a lot of attention span being dedicated. So to everybody out there, confirm or deny Jack Schlossberg that there's actually an appetite for serious content out there. You don't have to be a snarkmeister.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's so true. And I've been surprised myself in the same way that some of them more substantive, or what I think are, more substantive than other posts, do the best. But I will say, Senator, you are one of a kind. I remember not everybody can speak in paragraphs without any notes like you can. You're one of the best speakers that I've ever seen. I mean, I was a Senate page in 2009, and I remember, after a senator's done speaking, the pages are supposed to go up and ask them if they had any notes to submit to the record. And I remember you had like given maybe an hour-long speech that was like the most, substantive thing that I had heard on the floor. And I went up to ask you for your notes, and you were just like, I don't have any. And it was just like a mind-blowing moment for me as like a 16-year-old being like, how how is that possible? So I think, yeah, I mean, I think people are, no matter what it is online, if it's like a well thought out, well-reasoned argument that they themselves can find useful to make sense of things, I think people are desperate for that.
I sit in the Senate in a weird location. With my seniority, I should be forward. But that desk you came to, one in from the aisle in the back row towards the center, I'm there because your Uncle Teddy was there.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Why
And he
was his
stayed
page?
there even though he had all his seniority, because that was your grandfather's last seat before he left for the White House. So he stayed back there for that sentimental reason. He also stayed back there because in the back row, you can put an army of staff people behind you and have all your stuff ready when there's a real floor fight on the Senate floor, which doesn't happen much. But that's why Ted loved that particular desk, even though he could have gone much closer to front and center. So in honor to him, I'm just staying at that desk for as long as
Oh my God. Well,
I'm here.
I always thought he kept it there because it was closest to the candy drawer but I'll take your word for it.
That had something to do with it, I'm sure, also.
Yeah.
So another question, the last one about the Republican communications, beating us and getting out there, that came from an Instagram contact. And we've got another Instagram contract. You posted a reel on Instagram describing that Trump and Doggy, people say Doge, but I like to call them Doggy and the Muskrats, we're trying to crash the economy on purpose. Do you think the tariffs are part of that? How does that play into the willful destruction?
I mean, I think today we saw, I mean, we don't have to it's clear that the administration is willing to use the presidency to influence, to manipulate markets. And we saw today the president do just that by tweeting out it was a great time to buy just before doing something he knew would send the stock market way up. So I think, and that it seems, there's no way of knowing what's in his head, but it seemed, and a lot of people report that the reason why he backed off the tariffs today was because they didn't see the right movement in the bond yield curves. And then that was the real concern. So I think, from where I sit, are they trying to crash the economy on purpose? I think they're trying to manipulate markets in whatever way serves them in that moment. And I don't think that that's like a guess. I think that they've made that abundantly clear. And I think that and they've made it abundantly clear that they aren't particularly worried about the real life impacts it has on people, and that they're willing to not only dismiss them as just panic or hysteria, but actually lie to the American people about what they're trying to accomplish. So, yeah, I think that it's hard to know why they're doing any of the things that they're doing because they don't even seem to serve their own interests. But I certainly think that there's willful malpractice and influence of markets in a way that is grotesque.
And looking for corrupt goals, motives, and practices is I think, very worthwhile endeavor with this crowd. I think you're going to find one virtually every single time you look.
Exactly.
Before the last virtual assembly that we did, before this one with you, was with Martin O'Malley, former governor of Maryland, former mayor of Baltimore, former presidential candidate. And under the Biden administration, he was the administrator of Social Security.
Yep.
And he took the position that whether or not the Trump folks are trying to crash the economy to create tumult, turmoil, and turbulence, they were trying to crash Social Security. And that's why they're in wrecking the system, waiting for there to be an interruption in benefits so that they can then send their own tech bros and their own private equity cronies in to rescue from the situation that they themselves created.
I mean, hasn't privatization been a goal of the conservative movement of Social Security for a really long time? I mean, it feels like they're just always. And I feel like it's a classic playbook to defund federal programs and then blame them for not working and then hand them over to private enterprise. It's just absolutely classic. And I saw a video the other day. I can't quite remember who posted it, but it was, it really convinced me that, and I knew it already to be true, but Social Security is not what's bankrupting the United States as they often claim it is. Social Security has been an incredibly economically productive investment, and it's also paid for by people who submit money from their own paychecks into the Social Security Administration. So it's hard to keep up with their lies, but this is why I really do think that anytime that you know something about an issue or you can really point out something that is not true that they're saying, it's worth it to make a statement that specifically counters the fact, because a lot of people know that what they're saying doesn't sound right or they're sure that it's corrupt, but it's hard to actually focus yourself and make the argument. But there's a lot of value to other people in that.
Yeah. And I think it's also helpful to talk a little bit about motive.
Yeah.
It can be easy to call out the lie, but it makes it stick a little bit better if you have a plausible theory of what the motive is. And with Social Security, the plausible theory of why they're lying about saying that it's riddled with fraud, why they're lying about saying that it's a Ponzi scheme, is that they want to discredit the program so that when they break it, it is now both discredited and broken. And in they come to basically take it over and privatize it, the thing that Reagan tried and couldn't do.
I know. I mean, the idea that all of a sudden Elon Musk or President Trump are eager to pay back public debt that they don't owe is just laughable to me. and that's the justification that they give for pretty much everything that they're doing. And since when are they so eager? But you're right. I think the motive is key, and explaining things in detail is key, because they're very good at repeating the same things over and over. We have the difficult task of telling the truth.
Yeah. And packaging matters, because you can tell the truth effectively and tell the truth ineffectively. So you're good at telling the truth effectively. So I was told we had you for about 20 minutes, which it about has been right now.
Don't worry.
So you're a lawyer. You mentioned going to law school. We've had all kinds of a mess with the Supreme Court, between the creepy billionaires' lifestyles of the rich and famous program for the justices they want to keep happy, to the general destruction of traditional legal principles that have lasted for decades, all pointing in the direction of big Republican donors' financial interests and undoing pillars of democracy, like the Voting Rights Act that your father worked so hard to get passed, and that LBJ picked up the cudgel on after he was assassinated and drove through the Senate and made it happen. What are your thoughts about the Supreme Court?
I mean, I think President Trump has gotten how many seats now? 3?
He got 3, yeah.
Right. And so anytime you think that, or someone says there aren't differences between the candidates next time around, or tries to get out of voting as something that's not worth it because the whole system is broken, I think it's just a powerful reminder about just how much every single election matters, because once the Supreme Court a justice is confirmed, there's not much you can do about it beyond impeaching them, which seems like a pretty rare thing. I mean, I don't have any answer for what to do about the Supreme Court itself, but I think that like speaking out works. We're seeing it now, no matter what it is. And the Supreme Court is just as beholden to public opinion as, even though they pretend they're not. I think it matters. And so I think that speaking out and showing up, voting, protesting, making your voice heard, it's the only thing that makes a difference. And we're seeing that it's making a difference already. So I think it's just should make, I don't know, for me, it just makes me all the more determined to use my whole mind to try to fight for what I believe in.
And the thing about this in particular is that the public is so with us on this.
Totally.
In fact, the public has been way ahead of the Democratic Party on this.
Right. Well, another thing is sorry, Senator.
No, go ahead.
Well, I think people sometimes forget the different roles of the different branches, and that Congress has the power, if it decides to write anything into law, or not anything, but to protect the rights that we're talking about right now that are being threatened. And so I think that it's important to remind people also that if they're upset about what the Supreme Court is doing, part of the system of government that we have that's great is that Congress can do something about it.
Yeah.
And that we get to reelect our Congress every 2 and every 6 years.
Yeah.
And that brings me to a question that I actually really wanted to ask you, which was, I remember when I was a page, and I remember listening to my Uncle Teddy, Senator Kennedy, talk about, senators used to wait years before they gave a speech on the floor, and that the Senate etiquette and the rules among senators was like such a thing, and enforced only by the culture of the Senate. And I would love to know how that has changed since you've been there, and if there are any kind of old school ways that you think you'd like to see come back that people probably don't know left, or some ones that left that you think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, it's changed, I think, pretty dramatically. The individual committees used to be the center of Senate power. Now it's the leadership offices. junior people didn't usually have any clout until they had spent years here and built their position up the committee structure. Now, social media, outside funding, all of that means that you can come into the Senate and immediately, push yourself to the top of the pile. And that actually is probably a good thing because there's some new voices that very much need to be heard. And I think that a lot of the change has happened since the Supreme Court Citizens United decision. What that allowed was for a big special interest, and I focus a lot on the fossil fuel industry and their whole crooked climate denial operation. Once they had Citizens United, they could go into Mitch McConnell's office and they could say, if you get your Republicans lined up so that there's no more of this climate nonsense from them making what the Democrats want to do bipartisan, we can give you more money than you've ever seen in your life. And people won't even know it's coming from us because we can wash it through a 501c4 and a super PAC, and we can set up this whole infrastructure. And at that point, the majority leader, who's the person who has the access to that enormous pool of political dark money, then becomes immensely powerful in his caucus. He can decide what senators get the dark money when they need it in their races. He can withhold it. He can pile it on. He can use it to negotiate and line people up. So you can see the power slip away from regular Republican Senate members and move up to then Mitch McConnell. That's how somebody like Kavanaugh gets through when he's basically caught in the middle of a terrible, assault scandal from his youth, and nobody wants to vote on it. But the big donors who are behind the party at that point can say, look, you want us to cut you off? I know this is going to be a hard vote, but we're going to give you like $200 million into the next election. And you need that. So shut up, suck it up, vote for Kavanaugh, and we'll have the money there for you. And I'm absolutely confident that that's what happened behind the scenes when everybody started to spook. And same when Gorsuch came in and everybody was starting to spook about like, well, what had Mitch McConnell done with the Garland seat? How could we all like not even give the guy a meeting? That was the pressure from this huge dark money operation. So there's immense power in that. It's not just senators changing. It's the political environment in which the Senate operates that's changing. And there's been no bigger and no worse change to the political environment than Citizens United and the floods of special interest dark money that poured into politics. And actually, in some cases, the money didn't even have to pour in. The threats were enough. You can save your money. You just make the threat that you'll spend it. And everybody, oh, yes, yes, yes. So we'll sign right up. We'll never talk about climate change again, sir.
Well, I mean, this is the real, I feel like the struggle it always comes back to, which is, corruption and the interests of big business and influence on policy. And something that drives me crazy. I mean, I went to school for environmental law. I feel like climate change is the most, important and exciting, honestly, opportunity to build a new economy for America and for America to lead the world. And something that drove me crazy during the campaign that I tried to talk about was, the Biden administration did prove that it's a false choice between the economy and the environment. And they passed, incredibly ambitious environmental legislation and made investments in green technology. And at the same time, America produced the most oil it ever has, and fossil fuel companies did great under Biden. And so
complaining all the way.
Right, complaining all the way.
Complaining all the way to the bank.
All the way to the bank and all the way to massive consolidation in their industry and power for themselves. So it's hard to it's discouraging to hear how much power special interests have. But again, like I'm always left with the same thing, which is all I can do is make my own statement and make my voice heard.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of work, and you got to know where you stand, and you got to know the facts to back yourself up. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's any other way.
Well, the last time this really went toxic, it was a Republican who came in to fix it. Teddy Roosevelt, the great
Right,
trust buster, who
right,
took on the special interest. We don't have anybody like that
right.
in the Republican Party these days. And then his cousin FDR came in and was asked about, why was it that the big special interests, the bankers and Wall Street and everybody hated him as he put the Green New Deal through and brought us back out of the Depression. And he said, yes, they hate me and I relish their hatred.
Right,
So
right,
there was that spirit of combat.
right. Well,
And we're finding that again now, little by little, I think, as we deal with this corrupt Trump administration.
yeah, I really think that Democrats are doing this now and should continue to embrace the combat first tone that is often rewarded on social media. It's an uncomfortable place to live for sure, and it doesn't all have to be combative. But I do think, it's always been true that you really got to take a stand and fight for what you believe in. And people respond to that alone, even if they're unsure about, where they stand on an issue. If they see somebody who really cares about what they think and is willing to risk something, I think that's what the right has actually done really well,
Yeah.
and I applaud them for, is their risk taking, and their ability to, yeah, to just go all out. And that itself is, I think, convincing to young men, especially. So I think risk taking and the combat first, I think, has value in and of itself, even if it may not be a wonderful headspace for us all to inhabit 24/7.
Yeah, but still, important. The way
Yes.
I've described it is when, particularly now, when people are upset about where the country is and where it's going and the injustices in the economy and all of that, the first test for a candidate, particularly a presidential candidate, is, are you a fighter?
Yeah.
And once you get through that gate, you get to the next gate, which is, are you a fighter for me? And if you get through that gate, then you can start to tell people about the ways in which you will prove that you are a fighter for them with this bill or that bill or the other. Donald Trump would fight a fire hydrant that he was walking by. There is no doubt that he got through that gate. I don't think that President Biden, when he was the candidate, or Vice President Harris, when she was the candidate, got through that first gate. The
Yeah.
joy phase of her campaign, that original rocket launch, was wonderful. It was explosive, it was powerful. She was terrific. And then the second stage never fired, which was the point where she turns to the American people and says, I get how pissed off you are. And there's stuff that is rotten out there that I'm going to fix. It's the dark money. Look what they did to the Supreme Court. It's all these lies about climate denial that are going to start whacking you in your wallet. These are things that I'm going to fight on, and you can count on me to take the fight to the bad guys wherever I find them. And that second message never got launched.
Yeah. I mean, well said. I think, yeah, when the other side is doing what the other side is currently doing, like there's no, they're making it pretty easy for us to call them out. And
Yeah.
so I don't think we should shy away.
Yeah. And here's our big advantage. We don't have to do the lying and the mischief and the
Right.
nonsense that they're doing. All we have to do is call it out. A
Right.
spotlight works.
Right.
And so
Couldn't agree more.
we've got a big opportunity. Well, listen, I've taken more of your time than
No,
we
my gosh.
signed you up for. I'm delighted to have you on.
Thank you,
Thanks
Senator.
so much. Come back to Rhode Island sometime and
I'd love to.
get some family history soaked up.
Yeah.
And
Well, thank you. Let me just
really
say thank you
appreciate
for
you being here.
for your years of leadership, and for holding it down there in DC for all of us. We're rooting for you, and we all really appreciate your service to our country. So thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
I appreciate you and your family as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator, and thanks everybody.
So, fun part's over. Now you just got me. So, there are a bunch of questions that have piled up, and Megan McCabe, my comms director, is here, and she's going to pass me some questions, and I'll read them out so you know what the question is, and then I'll reflect on the question. Michael from South Kingstown, what action are you taking to fight GOP efforts to kill climate change initiatives? Will mortgages be a thing of the past? So that is actually two really interesting combined questions because they are connected. And what I've been doing is to try to show as strongly as I can that climate change is no longer just about polar bears. It's no longer just about green jobs. It's actually coming for our wallets. It's actually coming for our economy, and we have to get ready for it. So I amplify the warnings, and I'll give one example right now. It's the chief economist for the mortgage giant, Freddie Mac, who said, here's what happens. Climate change disrupts the environment, so you can't predict the risk of storms and floods and wildfires. And that means that the insurance companies have to either way jack their rates or withdraw. And when they've withdrawn, you can't get a mortgage in the areas where they've withdrawn from because you need insurance to get a mortgage. And if you can't sell your house because you can't find a buyer because nobody can get a mortgage on your property, then its value crashes. And according to the chief economist for Freddie Mac, that leads to a full-on cascade into a 2008 style recession. And that was just based on coastal risk. Now we have wildfire risk that is perhaps just as bad as coastal risk. So we have this insurance collapse that has been so warned of. I mean, we had the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, here in the Senate less than a month ago, testifying to the banking committee. He said, oh yeah, 10 to 15 years from now, there'll be regions of the country where you can't get a mortgage anymore. So he's confirming what the chief economist for Freddie Mac was saying. And of course, none of them are green. This isn't like League of Conservation Voters talking. This isn't the Sierra Club. This is really serious bankers and economists who are looking ahead and thinking, oh my God, this is how this falls apart. The Economist magazine, a very conservative magazine, just a little bit less than a year ago, had its lead article on how climate change was going to wipe out the global real estate market, the largest asset class on the planet, with an up to $25 trillion hit. So this is really serious. And the more I push that argument, the harder it is for Republicans to deflect and say, oh, that's just climate change. It's also important to focus on the corruption of the fossil fuel industry, because what they have done to dissuade the public that climate change is real and dangerous is probably the biggest fraud the planet has ever seen. So pointing out the really qualified, really thoughtful, knowledgeable people who are warning about what's happening, showing how the first experience of that is already coming true in Florida, particularly, and then pointing behind it to the lies of the fossil fuel industry has been my strategy. And I think it's a pretty good strategy. I know when I raise it among Republicans in the Senate, they haven't got an answer. It worries them. They know it's coming. And it's in a lot of their states. I talked about Florida, but Southern Louisiana, same thing, spiking. Southern Texas, same thing, spiking. North Carolina had those awful floods that wiped out areas that didn't even expect to have floods. The North, South Carolina, Georgia coasts are all seeing sea level rise. So this is a real thing. And I focus on Florida because it's first and worst. But guess what? Florida is the preview of coming attractions for Rhode Island. That's why I pay attention to Florida, because that is our Rhode Island future if we don't get ahead of this. So, Elizabeth from Warren, Rhode Island, what is the status of Medicaid and extended Medicaid? What can be done to protect them? Well, at the moment, we're smack in the middle of that fight. The Republicans put through their budget reconciliation bill with instructions to the committee that has jurisdiction over Medicaid to create an $880 billion cut. That cut is so big that if you look at the entire jurisdiction of that committee, there's no place else to go to get numbers like that except Medicaid. The math proves that they're coming after Medicaid. So all they had to do in this first round of votes, which they still haven't sorted out, they're trying to fight it out right now in the House, that battle is over what the instructions are to the committees. But when they're done, the committees then have to actually vote the law back And then that goes to the floor. That's the real law that gets passed. And in that law, you'll be able to read the text that cuts the money out of Medicaid. They won't be able to deny it any longer. They will have had to sit down and write out how they're going to cut Medicaid. And they're frightened of doing that. And they're particularly frightened of doing it after Trump blew up the US economy with his idiotic tariffs. So they've got a sense of, oh my God, we can really get burned by dumb decisions by this guy. And here's a really dumb decision that they're going to be forced to choke down by him. And I think there's going to be some pushback. We'll see how it goes. But putting the spotlight on Medicaid is how you fight back. Telling the stories of who this hurts, what it means to rural hospitals, what it means to women and infants in Rhode Island, what it means to nursing homes when they've got 2/3 of their clients, of their patients on Medicaid. You'll have nursing homes having to close their doors if the Republicans do to Medicaid what their own decisions signal that they are going to do. And then, of course, there's another population that I care a lot about because I wrote the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act that is the biggest addiction recovery bill Congress has ever passed. And the people who are fighting their way through addiction and into recovery and rebuilding their lives are being supported by Medicaid. And if you rip Medicaid away, you rip away the support for people across the country who are on what I call the brave and noble path of recovery. So there's a huge cost here. And telling those human stories and making it local is how I'm going about trying to make sure that we win that fight and protect those individuals. Kendra from Newport. Tariffs will destroy small businesses. Can you get a bipartisan bill passed to stop them? That is a really interesting question. We had the trade representative, Ambassador Greer, in the Finance Committee just a day ago. And this was the specific point that I made to him. It's one thing if you're Ford or GM or Apple or Google or some mega corporation, and you've got to deal in this terrible tariff turbulence that he has created. You've got so many subsidiaries and different ways you can move your money around. You can kind of manage your way through it. But if you're a small business, say in Pawtucket, and there's a thing that you do better than anybody else in the world, but you buy the materials to build that thing in Canada, and then you sell that thing to Ford or to GM to put into their vehicles or to Apple to put into their phones, you're dead because you just have that one thing. And the tariffs just made it impossible for you to make money doing that one thing. So my warning to him was, you're going to see small business failures across the country who you're not hearing from because you're only listening to billionaires and big corporations. And these business failures are real people, and they're going to be in red states as well as blue states. And you've got to wake up to that. So he didn't have a good answer for that. And interestingly, on the side, there's a bipartisan bill, just like you asked about. There's a bipartisan bill to pull back from the president his tariff authority. The president doesn't get to have tariff authority because he's king of the world. The president gets to have tariff authority because years ago, Congress gave it to him, not realizing that we'd elect a maniac like Donald Trump, who is doing massive destruction with that tariff power. So there are, I think by yesterday's count, 7 Republicans who are actually co-sponsors of that bill. And if there's 7 who've actually signed up to co-sponsor, you know there are at least 7 more who are lurking behind, too frightened to cross Trump, but like waiting for their moment to push this forward and telling the brave 7, yeah, do that, we need that, this is the right thing to do. So I think that Trump has really stepped in it with the tariffs. He's created economic damage that's going to cascade for weeks and months, and the clawing them back to 10% today isn't going to save. That damage is going to continue to reverberate out for months. And the Republicans have had a break in their trust that he is not a maniac and that he actually knows what he's doing. And they're now realizing, oh my God, we've got to protect ourselves and we've got to keep some of this power out of the hands of this individual. So we'll see how it breaks, but those were really good questions. And you're absolutely right to focus on small business, and bipartisan help may be on the way. Hannah from Cumberland, how do we ensure that science stays open and protected in the face of censorship? That is a really important question, because the Trump administration is out to destroy or disrupt all of the science expertise of the federal government. Even the folks at NOAA who predict the weather are getting cut and attacked. Now, who's against accurately predicting weather? But these guys just can't handle it. National Institute of Health, research into cancer, the offshore science of what's happening in the oceans. Wherever you find science, and don't get me started on vaccines, wherever you find science, you find Trump characters, oddballs, and muskrats out doing really significant damage. And that's going to have damage in our health if we're not getting vaccines out where they need to for, say, measles, or dealing with the bird flu properly. It's going to hurt our health when new drugs for cancer are slowed down in their development because we've underfunded the researchers who do that work. And it's going to hit the economy because the pharmaceutical industry, which makes a boatload of money off of that federal research, is going to have its research supply chain choked off. And then, you know, I'm married to a marine scientist, so it means a lot to me that GSO out at the University of Rhode Island, they do really good and important oceans work. And we have to pay a lot of attention to our oceans because they are really going critical from the superheating and the acidification that comes from climate change. And to silence their voices when they're warning us about what's real, it's like turning off the headlights on a car driving through the night. Science is our headlights. It is dangerous to damage the science. So, Hannah, thank you for that. We're doing our best to stand up, make sure that the funding stays, make sure that they find other ways to get their voices out about what's going on. But really, you don't want accurate weather information from NOAA? What the hell? Lisa asks me, please talk about healthcare. The closure of Anchor Medical should be a national issue. Waits for new PCPs, primary care providers, is now 18 to 24 months. So we got several things going around on this. One is that Rhode Island is paid less by Medicare than Connecticut is, and then Massachusetts is. And not by a little, by a lot. It's a 20% difference. So it's a big deal. And I'm constantly rowing with CMS that they allow this to continue. Westerly Hospital in Westerly, Rhode Island is paid 20% less than Bacchus Hospital, which is probably a half-hour drive away in Connecticut. We have in Providence, Women and Infants. We've got Hasbro Children's Hospital, and we've got Rhode Island Hospital. Between them, they provide spectacular services, research, they're teaching hospitals, they're top-level trauma centers. And you drive down 195, and just across the border in Fall River, there's St. Anne's Hospital, which is a perfectly good little hospital, but it doesn't provide the suite of services that Rhode Island Women and Infants and Hasbro do, and it gets paid more. It gets paid more for the same procedures. So I've been fighting that battle. We won one battle to adjust the procedures favorably for Rhode Island, and now we've got this second battle that I'm in the middle of. It is a big deal. We also, I think, have the ability to do a lot of internal reforms in Rhode Island. We're teed up for that. A lot of work has been set up preparing for that. I'm not going to dwell on all the different elements, but we're actually prepared to move into a much better climate, a much better healthcare area. And I'll just close with flagging two things. I fought very hard to get into the Obamacare bill something called accountable care organizations, which is a new way of paying your primary care physician, your family doctor, so that they have more flexibility in how they treat you and they can make money when they keep you healthier instead of just only getting paid for a procedure, only getting paid for a prescription, only getting paid for a procedure, only getting paid for a prescription. So when we got that passed into law, two entities in Rhode Island took advantage of that. One was Coastal Medical, and the other was Integra, which is then called Rhode Island Primary Care Physicians. And they became the two best ACOs in the country. So we can do this in Rhode Island, and we can particularly do it well if we're not stuck in a financing hole, 20% worse off than Connecticut and Massachusetts. So those are my two immediate battles. And I think that, you know, if a primary care practice can hire because they can pay commensurate with what Massachusetts and Connecticut practices are paying, then the delay for getting a primary care provider will shrink because we'll have plenty of doctors, because we'll have plenty of revenue from the federal government to pay for them. Is the Trump-Musk relationship showing cracks? Asks Karen from Newport. Oh boy, is it ever? And I couldn't be happier about that. Musk is spectacularly unpopular, all polling shows, and him prancing around with shiny chainsaws over his head and jumping around on Trump stages with his belly sticking out under his t-shirt and all his madness and lies about Social Security and all the just foul personal meanness that he deploys against people using X as his way to whip up cruelty and threats. All of that is not going over well. And Trump is pretty attuned to who's helping him and who's hurting him. When Musk was giving him $250,000 and tipping races like Pennsylvania towards him by going through Pennsylvania offering $1 million checks, well, yeah, they were best buds. But when Musk starts trashing Trump's reputation, that's for real. And before you even get to Trump, House members, Republicans, senators, Republicans are seeing for themselves what we're all seeing, which is that Musk is kind of a maniac. And he's really irresponsible. And he's really unpopular. And they don't want to have to carry that Musk sack of bricks into the 2026 election. So it's not just Trump who's getting nervous about the role of Musk. It's also Republicans in Senate and Republicans in the Congress. They have shown no spine whatsoever. It takes 4 Republicans in the House to completely change the trajectory of this country and restore a little bit of sanity again. It takes 4 senators to do the same thing. You can't get to 4. They won't do it. They're all frightened of Trump or obedient to Trump. But these kind of things are where the breaks come. And I think the tariffs are creating a break. I think Ukraine created a beginning of a break. I think we're starting to see the sort of mad stampede of MAGA start to bang up against some pretty hard obstacles, like everybody hates Musk. Putin is a thug, and to pretend he isn't is a lie that everybody knows. You shouldn't mess around with Social Security, and Musk can't be trusted. So what can I do to help stop illegal deportations and detainments? For that, the best work is actually being done in court. What is helpful for us in the public arena to do is to explain what these stories are, to tell the truth about it. There is literally no evidence that the barber with a family and children in America who they swept up and sent to this brutal prison in El Salvador has anything to do with a gang. They've had chance after chance to go into court and say, here is the evidence of why this guy is a dangerous gang member. And they haven't been able to say it. In fact, a Justice Department lawyer said, "You're right. We can't prove this. This was a mistake." That's what they say in court when they have an obligation of candor to the court or when they're under oath. But then the attorney general keeps saying, "Oh, bad guy, definite gang member." Just not true. Just not true. It's what Trump wants to hear, but it's just not true. So supporting the litigants who are bringing these cases forward, making sure that, the rule of law prevails here, and debunking the lies that cover their incompetence and misconduct is, I think, the combination that we are working with. Do your Republican friends and colleagues genuinely believe Trump is good for America? I feel like I'm being punked. So that's a little bit like I'll answer it briefly because it's a little bit like the answer I just gave you. I can remember traveling with, going out to dinner with, having conversations with Republican members of Congress who are still here, who were mocking Donald Trump, who thought he was ridiculous, who were laughing at him and disgusted, literally disgusted by him. But then he won. And so they've gradually been making an accommodation. When he came back and won the second time and brought in a really rough gang of political thugs with him, they began to not only feel the momentum of his victory and the desire to support a president of their party, but begin to take real beatings when they crossed him. Both the immediate political thugs in his circle who'd made the threatening calls and the Musk threats to put a bounty on Republicans in the next Republican primary and say, I'll give $50 million to anybody who runs against this guy. And then the threat issue from what I call the flying monkeys, the creeps from the far right on the internet, who from anonymity make really vile, really dangerous threats to people that are quite scary. That whole combination has just packed the Republicans into submission, but they don't like the decision to choose Putin over the Ukrainian freedom fighters. They don't like the crazy stuff Musk is doing. They don't like having to own any attack on Social Security. They're super anxious about Medicaid. They're super anxious about the tariffs, which just kind of exploded in their face. And so I think there's a balance happening right here. Do you believe that supporting Trump is good for America versus do I believe that supporting Trump is good for me? And I think they still think that supporting Trump is good for them because he has such a hold over the Republican Party, but that is starting to shake as we get closer to 2026. But I distinctly remember conversations that I had with Republican senators who were still in the Senate, disgusted by this guy and mocking him. And so the sudden 180 to subservience and obedience and sycophancy, it's actually cost me some friendships. It's just hard to stay friends with somebody when you've seen their character evaporate that way right in front of your eyes. So I'm told that this is our last question because the clock is running out. This is Kirby, who is a high school student. Any advice for future civil servants? Yes. First of all, do it. Get involved. Get involved in government. I encourage people, even while it looks like it's dark days right now, get involved. If you want to be a lawyer, go for it. Go to law school. It's never mattered more to have lawyers who can go in and take on something big like the Trump administration and fight for what's right and true and just. Go for it. Go for it in elective office. Join a campaign. Join a city council campaign. It doesn't matter. You'll enjoy the camaraderie. You'll enjoy the experience. If you find out you don't like it, okay. You will have had a good learning experience. You may find out you do like it. I never thought I was going to like this stuff. I tried it. I did. And that's why I'm here now. So try it. And working in government is a really valuable thing. Trump is trying to destroy it. He's trying to wreck the infrastructure that defends the public from big special interests. But it's still valuable and meaningful to be making decisions in the public interest. You get to do that when you're in public service. And it's really, really important. I mentioned my dad at the beginning because he and then Jackie Bouvier knew each other as kids and as teenagers growing up in Rhode Island. But, you know, he went off to war. He became a Marine Corps dive bomber pilot in World War II. He joined the CIA and became a CIA officer. He transferred to the Foreign Service and was in very difficult and dangerous positions all of his career. When he retired, he was called back out of retirement by Ronald Reagan to build Special Operations Command in the Pentagon, which he did, and then went back into retirement. This was a man who lived a life of patriotism and public service, and he got enormous satisfaction and joy out of it. And in my own way, I'm trying to replicate his service. So there are examples of people who, through the military, through city council work, through signing up to participate in a political campaign, join our great American democratic experiment. And to do that is, I mean, it's almost never wrong. So Kirby, go for it. Thank you, everyone.